What's up, everybody? Gibby here from Team Purple Curve, and I'm going to be going over Handlock and why I feel it's one of the strongest decks in the current meta for ladder as well as just conquest tournaments. So I feel that Handlock, it's been around for a very long time, and it's always been considered a very good deck. But when the meta is more aggressive, it kind of falls off. Like Face Hunter being a huge deck, and even like the quicker zoo decks, kind of did pretty well against it. So now that Patron came out, and through Patron Hearthstone came out, the deck got a huge boost in it got better cards, as well as it gained a very good matchup in Patron, and Patron as well forced out a lot of its bad matchups. So I'm going to go card by card, what each card's used for, how you should use it, and the use of it in each matchup, because I feel this is one of the most complicated decks there is in Hearthstone, but if you're able to master it, you get great results with it. So first off, I'm going to go Mortal Coil. This card it's great in some matchups, and in some matchups you have to really reach to find use for it. So against the aggro decks, mostly Face Hunter and Paladin, you're able to just kill the guy for free and take a draw. It kind of stops them from even being really early aggressive. They won't drop their Abusive Sergeant, or shouldn't drop their Abusive Sergeant on one, so you just get a Mortal Coil for free, draw, and your turn one as Handlock, you're pretty much going to always want to pass into your tap game, so it just opens up plays that normally you wouldn't have, and then it outs things and doesn't lose your card advantage, so you can't be mad about that. In the control matchups like Control Warrior, Handlock Mirror, even Druid to an extent, you really need to look for places to make this card good. That's one of the key things people need to learn about Hearthstone, and it'll increase your success a lot, is finding value in cards that aren't good in your matchup. Mortal Coil isn't too good in this matchup, so even though I have two different plays, I have one play that involves Mortal Coil getting me a draw, and the other play lets me develop my board a little better. I'm not gonna say specifically which is better, of course, because it's all situation dependent, but put a little more emphasis on looking into the play that lets you use bad cards in your matchup well, because the good cards in your matchup will always be good. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Mortal Coil. Sometimes it's just a cycle card to get you to your better cards. So let's move on to Zombie Chow. One Zombie Chow, I love. Zombie Chow is my favorite card in the game right now. It's undercosted. It's a death battle. Doesn't matter at all. It just lets you control the early game and get to the late game, which is just hand on what Handlock wants to do. It has the added bonus of if you start with the coin, you're not able to go tap on 2, tap on 3 to go play a 4-cost Molten Giant. You actually overdraw because you get an extra card and the coin. But if you go second and open Zombie Chow, you can actually play Zombie Chow on 1, tap on 2, tap on 3, Mountain Giant on 4, which is just pretty much the dream. I would never play 2 Zombie Chow because the card you really never want to draw late game. It's honestly just dead. It hurts you. Most cards you draw a late game that aren't good, you can just play as a body. Zombie Chow is kind of the opposite of that when you need to burst them for game. So great as a one of, but anything more than one, you're just kind of bringing the power of your deck down. So moving on, we'll go to Dark Bomb. You play 2 Dark Bomb. It's just very simple removal. It kind of feels out of place in a deck with all these complicated card effects, just being deal 3 damage. But it's very important. It lets you make good trades. It lets you trade up with let's say you Sunfeared something, and then they play a Tharsian. Now you can just do your Taunt Giver plus the Dark Bomb now outs it. So it has a lot of uses, and against decks like Hunter or Paladin, it just has a real quick answer to kill their guy, mostly Knife Juggler. So it's a good card. That's pretty much it. It's just standardly a good card. So moving on, we'll go to Ancient Watcher. One of my favorite cards in the deck, and I guess one of the more complicated cards to play. I feel when I first started playing it, I didn't really know where to fit it in. Sometimes I just throw it on board. Sometimes I wouldn't throw it on board. You have to know the matchups. Against Warrior decks like Warrior, you don't want to throw it on board because you don't want to just give them an extra target for you to keep on Brawl. It's a good card to play on Rag with. It just has so many uses. Obviously, you can owl it to swing with it. That's not the best play, but you have to look at everything in specific scenarios. So it can really get there. It lets you get the 2/1 body with owl on board, which is actually relevant because it trades into some of the early game minions. And so first turn against Hunter, you coin out. Let's say they pass turn 1. You coin out Ancient Watcher, and then owl it. Now you have a pretty good board to help transition you to the late game. So let's see. Moving on from there. Also, oh yeah, obviously it sets up for a very good Shadow Flame, one of the like stronger board clears in the game, as well as like you can always play around Mirror Entity with this deck extremely well. The fact that you have your Taunt Givers, your Ancient Launchers, and your Zombie Chow. So that's a really nice plus, because one of the main ways that decks like Mage beat you is sets up a good Mirror Entity to stop your 4-drop, and this kind of negates that. So moving on, 2 Sunfear Protector. Obviously the whole deck's based around like the unfair, just unfairly dropping undercosted 8/8s and taunting them. So obviously you have to play 2 of that. One of the main things I want to mention, and my win rate against the aggro decks went way up when I realized that dropping Sunfear Protector on 2 against aggro is more often than not the correct play. It just gives you that body and lets you move on to the late game. Like that's one of the, if you're gonna take anything away from this video, it's when you're playing a control deck, the point is to outlast the aggro decks by any means necessary. Card for card, every single card in your deck is probably going to be better than theirs. Their one advantage is they can play all the cards while you're just waiting. It's just how the mana system works in card games like this. So you want to take advantage of that, and just, well, not take advantage, but be aware of that, and then play your cards on curve early, even if you're getting full value, because you don't need full value since every single card is just a better card. So that's pretty much all I'd say about Sunfear Protector. It's just an obvious include. 1 BGH, it's like 50-50 if this card's really good or not right now. Like with Patron being like a really good deck, it doesn't really have much use against Patron. Like yeah, it could get a Frothing, but it's rare they're gonna drop Frothing and not kill you where it's big enough to. So it's a card I could see being cut, but it's just so good when it resolves, and it is Handlock. I'm gonna say that too. Like Handlock has room for pretty much everything because you're gonna see every single card. So like, what's one of the things I love about this deck is I don't care what I draw. Obviously I want a 4-drop, but for the most part, I'll never mulligan a hand, draw it, and just be like, wow, I'm gonna lose because my hand is just garbage. That's really not how Handlock works. Like the game should play out. I should be able to like make decisions and play my game aside from really early game aggression. So you can fit. I can fit Big Game Hunter in, even if it isn't quite good in this meta because of how good it can be. We'll move on to Hellfire ×2, the best board clear in the game right now. It's just one card. Like the only thing I can think of that matches it is like Consecration Equality, but that's 2 cards. So Hellfire does a lot for the deck. It destroys any kind of like mid-range deck. It doesn't do great against like Face Hunter or like even like mid-range or the aggressive Paladin, because Face Hunter just doesn't care once the cards have already hit your face, they already got value, and then Paladin has all the Divine Shield, which makes Hellfire not that great against it. But any kind of mid-range deck it just destroys, and you'd be surprised by the amount of games you actually win by just bursting them with Hellfire and Dark Bombs. So it's an auto-include 2 of, and this 1 Shadow Flame, like that's, people mess around with that a lot, like 2 Shadow Flame, 1 Hellfire. It's just like, I'd rather have the consistency of the Hellfire to just drop anytime I want, rather than needing a monster with Shadow Flame to work. So that's just my personal thoughts, and especially with Patron right now being so big, Hellfire just makes sure they can never, I mean, they'll have like Deathbite, Inner-Rage, Patron, and it's like you probably shouldn't even do that against Warlock because of Hellfire. Like, so they have to be able to OTK you to even play, and then this deck plays taunts, like big taunts. So that's why it retains such a huge advantage over every version of Warrior or Patron, is because of Hellfire. Going in next, like that's pretty much all I'll say about Hellfire. And about Shadow Flame, the last thing I say is like, it's obviously look for the Sylvanas play. Like Shadow Flame Sylvanas is probably one of the best 1/2s in the game for sure. I mean, blow the whole board. If anything's good enough to survive, it's now yours. Like, you can't argue with that. So, something else about Shadow Flame. You just want to set it up with your giants. Like, don't get too greedy and, like, not Shadow Flame a board that could be Shadow Flame. But I'm trying to say is, like, against Warlock, don't just try to go face with your giants when you could Shadow Flame their board, because you're just going to get Shadow Flame back. So it's a really good card, and you need to get value of it when you can, because it's a combo card essentially. So like if you see a good spot to use it, it's probably right to do so, depending on the matchup, because it's one of those cards that like if you don't take the opportunity to use it, you might not get it. So moving on to Defender of Argus as a 2 of. I cannot believe that like after playing this deck, well, the first list I ended up looking up and playing was actually ran 1 Argus, 2 Sunfairies, and people were arguing with me about how it's not right to run 4 taunts. And like one of these like why like what's wrong with 4 taunts? That's the whole point of the deck. And the only argument I got was like, well, you get those 4 taunt hands, but I mean that doesn't really make sense because like one, it's handlock. Any cards I draw, I'll just draw more. So my hands aren't the biggest deal in the world. And like there's so many games where I'm just like praying I need something to give me taunt. I need a taunt giver. I need something. So I wouldn't imagine even dreaming of playing this deck without double Defender of Argus, double Sun Fairy, and it's like Defender of Argus is so important. Like it lets you trade up so much ridiculous stuff. Like it lets your Twilight Drake deal with Tharsians. It's just a great card for 100 different reasons. That's why it's not just used in like, it's used in Zoo, it's used in Paladin. It's just a good card, so I don't see why you wouldn't include it. Moving on to Twilight Drake, there's not much to say about Twilight Drake. It's just great card. It farms minions. There's certain points I guess about it, like playing. It's like based on the matchup to know which one to drop. Like let's say you're living in a perfect world, you have the choice to drop Twilight Drake or Mountain Giant. It depends on the matchup. If the matchup you're playing is like you're gonna gain value from farming minions, you're gonna want to drop the Twilight Drake. Whereas like if it's a matchup where you just want to go face and like more of a control matchup, the Giant's probably better. Except for like Druid, be careful. Like Twilight Drake isn't very good against Druid because they can just keeper it, and then like be careful. Like if they keep her on 4 in Twilight Drake, it's not the worst thing. But like let's say they keep her on 6, they can hero power, they can slam their zombie chow. Just be aware of what they can do to Twilight Drake and make that in your decision when you're weighing on which one. As far as like trying to play around like BGH on 4, I mean honestly, you really can't. Like just assess the situation. Like if I play Drake here, does the deck have an out for it? Probably not. If I play Mountain Giant here and it gets BGH, am I just done? You got to make that decision there. So that's like one of the hardest decisions to make on a game by game basis, and you can kind of just see what they're playing. Like if they're playing any other tech cards, like see what's popular, how popular is BGH in this specific deck, and go off that. That's probably one of the more skilled things in playing Handlock is predicting their cards, their tech cards, and trying to play around them. Moving on to Healbot. I mean, Healbot just brought this deck, like, it's so much better. It's so hard to kill. It gets low, drops the advantage of being low, and then heals right back up. Actually, when I'm playing against Face Hunter, I don't keep either Healbot or Belcher in my opening hand. I feel having on turn 5 is way too slow. Like, if I drop Healbot on turn 5 and I heal for 8, but they have 7 damage on board, excluding what they have in their hand, does it really matter? No. So it's really important in that matchup, but not important enough to keep. Another thing, too, about this deck is knowing when you have to Healbot. Like, if you know every deck's reach, and like I would definitely recommend like looking up all the top popular decks and knowing like what they're realistically able to reach for. Like Handlock, I would say should be able to reach for 6. I realistically expect them to have 2 of their burn spells: Dark Bomb, Hellfire, whatever damage they have on board. So if they're not in that range, I don't really want to play Healbot. Whereas like I don't want to make my Molten Giants just dead. So like, a lot of times you lose the game because you are not able to play your Molten Giants, and it's if you look back, it's like, well, I played my Healbot in a situation where I didn't need to. So try to save Healbot and just play it when the situation demands it. But if there's something else and you do have Molten stuff in the deck, don't get greedy with it. And just like I said, know your matchups, know every deck's reach, and yeah, it's a great card, but don't just throw it out there because it's on curve, and never just throw it out there. Or don't ever throw that card out on curve. Handlock's not the kind of deck that does that, really. So this is a bit of advice. Belcher is just there because it's Belcher. It's a great 5-drop. It protects your... It's nice behind a Drake sometimes. Like it does, like I drop Drake, they drop a Giant, I can Belcher and then deal with it. Or like it blocks their Giant if you're playing in Mirror. It's the 100% anti-aggro killer. Like they can't just kill with removal because you still get a taunt and they can still take out their guys. So... I mean, I don't think really anyone's arguing about the 2 Healbot, 2 double Belcher. Moving on there, Tharsian, like this card is just amazing, especially for this deck. A deck that has like a very clunky deck that always has a hand just seems like the perfect deck for Tharsian. Like I think the only deck that uses Tharsian better is Patron probably because it will kill you with Tharsian. So you just want to play Tharsian. Like probably pretty much the card is always to play on curve. You get the chance to drop Tharsian, do it. Like every single card in the deck gets much better with Tharsian, especially like Mortal Coil now. Like instead of like looking for places to fit that 1 mana if it's not a good card, like you have 0 mana Mortal Coil, so you don't really care where you need to fit it. what else? Like Rag, bringing Rag down, bringing Boom down, like coining into Tharsian, and then dropping Boom on 5, and then dropping Boom on 6 is like a really early tempo, like really good tempo shift for them. So, or for you. So it's just a good card in general, obviously. Sylvanas, great against control, and you have Shadow Flame, so it's just one of the best cards in the game, and your deck uses it better than any other deck. Dr. Boom, don't say much about him. One of the most broken cards in the game, and like playing this deck actually shows you how broken Boom is, because you're dropping like 8/8s all the time, and it's not that impactful. But when you're dropping Boom and they don't have a way to deal with it, like BGH right away, it's huge because the Boom bots are just so much value. So playing this deck has taught me how good Boom is, especially since like I'll bait. Not really bait, because ideally I don't want that to happen, but they'll use their BGH on 4 on my Mountain Giant. And if I'm able to stabilize past that and make it to turn 7, I drop Boom, they don't have any more BGH in the deck. It's just, the game's usually won from there. Ragnaros, I don't play Jiraxxus. I don't feel it's a really good card. Right now, it's just a little bit too slow. And like you just want to be a little bit more greedy with the deck. Like, you have all this draw, you have all this way to like survive, see every card in your deck. Like, you just want to keep dropping big boys, and like at the end of the day, they're gonna have to deal with your mountains, your Twilight Drakes, your Emperor, your Sylvanas, your Boom. Eventually, they're gonna run out of ways to deal with your big guys, and then you're dropping Rag. And well, if they have no way to deal with Rag, it's just really rough for them. And then like the way a lot of like most players are forced to deal with Rag is to overload their board with just a bunch of small minions, so Rag doesn't start pinging their important stuff or pinging their face for ridiculous damage. So they're just going to play a bunch of small minions, and then what deck has the best AoE in the game? I would say definitely Warlock, so they just fall right into that trap. Not to mention Rag, just Taunted Rag is really good as well. Like, now it comes out, deals 8, and now they have to slam the guys and do it, or like deal with it. So very important card. Definitely worth the replacement of Jiraxxus. Mountain Giant, every Handlock player hates this card, but they also love him. Like, he's the most annoying card because you have to play in such a certain way to make him live, and then when he gets BGH'd on 4, you're just like, it wasn't worth it, because you tapped twice, wasted 3 turns, invested like 12 mana, and they threw 3 mana out. They got to play their other turns, and he's dead. So when you put it like that, it doesn't seem that good. But sometimes dropping him on 4 and then not having an out, he wins games, and he kind of is just the transition from, like, he's a testing point of Handlock. Like, I'm gonna drop Mountain Giant. Do you have an out? No. Well, then I win. If you do, then we're still gonna play a game. So he's like an auto include, and like before, he's been dropped for demons. There's a lot of different versions of Handlock out there, but I still feel this is the best version just because it has just so many threats. Double Moltens, obviously, Moltens they're unfair cards. Like, whenever I play any kind of card game, especially like since I played other card games, I always look for cards that are just unfair, and then I'll play those. So my opponents are playing fair, very like 1-for-1 basic cards, and I'm going to play the unfair cards and go for the easy win. It just makes the most sense. And that's what Molten Giant is. Like, I get huge rewarded just by playing my hero power and like just taking damage. Like, I get rewarded with an undercosted 8/8. I can taunt them up, and like I said before, I feel the two of the most broken things in the game are taunts and weapons. And one of the most broken things in card games is free cards. And Molten Giant is essentially a free or an undercosted card, and then the hero powers, or the Warlock's hero power, is free cards. So the deck has everything I feel an unfair deck would want, and that's why I think it's a great deck in general. So going to its matchups, they're actually all pretty complicated. I'll start with Hunter. So against Face Hunter, like, I'm not going to say your favorite. It would be ridiculous to say that it's a favorite matchup just because of the nature of the hero powers and just of the curve and all that. But it's definitely winnable. Like, what you want to do is like mull really hard for Moltens. Moltens will win you the game every single time. Those are the cards you have to look for. Because the play is to get them low, taunt up the Moltens. If you have a heal bot, that's amazing. If you don't, you play a game of, alright, so you have to have out and you have to have enough reach to kill me. If you don't, I'm going to kill you in 2 turns. So, sometimes you actually have the luck of transforming or make the transformation to late game with like Sun Fury, Zombie Chow, and all that. which is really nice. Obviously, go for those. But Molten Giant is really how you're going to win that game or lose that game, is because you have to kill them quick. Because over time, they're just going to kill you with the hero power. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to put them on a clock. And conveniently enough, that like Molten puts them on like a 2-turn clock. Well, 3-turn, but I mean, you'll get damage in there. There's a taunt giver. You do have some burst. So that's how you play the matchup versus Face Hunter. Versus mid range, it's just a lot simpler. You play the same kind of game because they're gonna want to play the same kind of game against you as Face Hunter does. Just be really, really aggressive early on, and it's just a little bit easier. And just, as long as you play around freezing trap smartly, like you'll be okay. The only downside is they might have the Hunter's Mark, which is really annoying. But I mean, you can't really play around it. Like some of the matchups, especially Handlock, you don't get to play around stuff. You just do what you do and hope it's good enough, which doesn't sound super interactive. But it's just how the game is at this point, and that's okay. It's only a couple matchups that are like that. Some of the big matchups, like you're obviously favored against Patron, against Control Warrior. I think you're hugely favored, but it's also one of the most fun matches to play. Like you have to play it correctly, and if you do, you're hugely favored. Like drop Twilight Drake over Mountain Giant because you want it to get executed. You want stuff like you look for spots to get your cards killed. Like, you just want to outlast them. Because at the very end of the game, you're going to have, like, 1 or 2 more big minions than they have removal. I mean, Zombie Chow, kind of... When you look for removal, I'm thinking of Shield Slam. So, the basic point of Zombie Chow is, like, so good against them, even though it doesn't really seem like it. If you drop it, it kind of keeps them from Shield Slamming you. So, like, let's say, like, I'm turn 1, or they're turn 1, I'm turn 2. So, they pass, I pass. They armor up, I tap. They armor up, I tap. And then they armor up, I drop Drake. They can armor up and shield slam it right then and just uncontested, or anything really, any even Mountain Giant. So like that's not really good, and Zombie Chow just kind of erases that. Just be careful to play around Brawl. I mean, you have a lot of freedom in this matchup because they don't have a lot of burst, and their burst is through attacking you, and your deck relies on taunts. So you're able to kind of set the tone of the whole matchup. So the way I like to do it is like I give them a okay Brawl, like. I give them a point where they have to brawl. They're going to have to play brawl or lose, and then, but not fully commit to it. And then once brawl's gone, then drop your board. Every now and then I'll run into someone running double brawl, and well, I mean, like that usually gets me. And then I'm really relying on just trying to outvalue them because I'm playing with my whole deck. They're going to play with like whatever cards they're going to see once per turn. I have my whole deck to play with, and so if I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose in fatigue. Is usually how it comes out in Control Warrior. So just play like a really good grindy game, just bait out their removal, and then drop your large value cards later on, and just leave them with nothing left to deal with it. Going against Paladin it's a nightmare. Like every version, or there's only 2 versions of Paladin, but both versions of Paladin just solidly beat you. Aggro Paladin beats you way faster than Face Hunter, I feel. You have way less ways to deal with it. Your Hellfire doesn't touch anything because they can give them Divine Shield. You're just begging to get Divine Favored. It's just a horrible matchup. Do the same thing you do versus like Tempo or against Face Hunter. Look for a low curve. Try to mold for Moltens, but they get a lot less viable if they're playing like Equality or anything like that, or they're like the Blessing the Kings plus 8 of the shields lets them just deal with it. So hard matchup. I mean, every deck's gonna have some hard matchups. Against Control Paladin, same thing. They have Peacekeepers, they have Equality, they have Consecrate. They just have the world. They have everything they could possibly want against you to deal with pretty much everything you have. Like you can't just leave a small board because they'll just Peacekeeper it. So you want to drop 2 guys so they can't double Peacekeeper. Then if Consecration Equality, some still play BGH. So it's a bad matchup. You know. You have to deal with it, play it the best you can. Trying to think of some stuff that helps in that matchup, but it is just a really bad matchup the whole way. Let's see. I just have a problem dealing with Ancient. No, not even Ancient Watcher, so yeah, just deal with it. Rough matchup. Moving on to Mage, like Freeze Mage. It's, like I said, not a huge deck in Ladder, pretty big deck in Tournament for whatever reason. Sometimes this deck can deal with it. It depends on your draws. The most important card you have is Ragnaros because they can't freeze Rags, like dealing them 8. So try to set it up so you can deal some early damage early on with with your giants, your big swinging guys. Get them low, drop rag to where it'll kill them. That's my best advice. Remember, you can always owl your frozen cards and get in there for game. And you can owl your Ragnaros to what it attacks, so you take the randomness away from it, just randomly pinging something. So that's pretty much all the advice I have for you in that matchup. Temple Mage, follow the same line of thought you're going to do in the early game matchups of Face Hunter and Aggro Paladin. When it comes to Druid's an interesting matchup because there's a lot of like disparity on which one's favored. I personally think Handlock is heavily favored against Druid, just because I feel they have a good way to deal with their Molten Taunt. Now, like if it gets to late game, you drop that. There's nothing they can really do. Let's see, like none of the minions really threaten you, like, and you're dropping such big minions on them. They have no choice but to waste their whole turn dealing with your minions. They're not able to establish a board themselves. And if Druid doesn't establish a board, Druid isn't very good. Like the card Ancient of War, for example, it's a 7-cost 5/5. Draws them 2 cards, but that just general 7 cost for a 5/5 is awful stats. So if they're not able to have a board backing that up and they're just dropping that to your board, you don't really care about the cards that they're drawing, because you just clear the board, hit them face, go, and then they don't have really like impactful minions aside from like every deck's got boom. So that's why I think the deck has a pretty big advantage. Obviously, you're going to lose if they like growth, innervate out something crazy, you can't answer it. But that's just Druid. Like no deck really can say it'll beat Druid 100% of the time, because Druid is one of those decks that has god draws that nothing can deal with. I'm not going to go into like Shaman. Like I don't really care. Maybe it does probably have a good matchup because of how good Urshock is, but it's irrelevant on the Conquest tournament wise, and the ladder I don't really see it. Priest, you're heavily favored against Priest. There was a build running around like the last month or something I was seeing that ran like double Mind Control, double Light Bomb. And that was specifically built to beat Handlock, and it still, I don't feel, did it well enough. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Priest. Like, Priest made a deck to beat this deck, and it didn't do it. So anything I missed? Rogue. I think you're favored against Rogue just because they're inconsistent. Your deck's very consistent. They have a lot of burst, but you're able to like put them in spots where they need to put their burst on your minions. And Rogue is interesting because like it has a consistent way to kill you, but it only has a certain amount of damage in the deck. Like it can't do more than aside from hitting with the minions over and over again. Like you clear the minions, they only have a certain amount of burst or damage they can do. If you like move some of that damage away from your face onto minions through taunts, they just kind of run out of steam and they can't really do anything about it. And then like they lose a lot of tempo against you with like on turn 4 they're like prep sprint, you're like mountain giant, they can like sap it, but you play it again next turn, and like they have no good way to deal with boom, and this deck runs like 7 versions of boom, like just big cards, so that's why I feel it's really, really favored for Handlock. When you go into the Warlock mirror matches, they're like either 50-50. It used to be pretty heavily favored Handlock when it was only Zoo and Handlock, and Zoo at that time was like a really, really early game deck with like guaranteed double flame imp, the wolf and all that, like, so it didn't really have much late game, and Handlock just had to survive, drop some taunts, no problem. Now that mid-range Demon Zoo's kind of taken form, it's a lot harder of a matchup. I still feel that Handlock's favored, but not by such a large amount. I would say like 60-40 Handlock, but like now they're playing Sylvanas, they're playing Boom, they just have a lot more to their deck. So, I mean, if you're playing against Warlock, you have to worry about Zoo. So, just deal with the same way you deal with early aggressive decks, and hopefully they won't be able to just like match your late game cards card for card. The Maligod deck actually made me not want to play Handlock for a while because it just felt like such an unwinnable game. They played the double BGH, and you'd be trying to grind them out, and they'd just kill you with Mali. But that deck's kind of fallen out of favor because it could not deal with any kind of aggression. Like, it just had no way to kill like Hunter and all that. So, I still feel, again, like there was a time where I felt if I was playing Handlock and I queued into Warlock, I would be unfavored. And that's just not the case anymore. Now when I play Handlock, I feel if I queue into Warlock, I'll be favored in that matchup. So I don't think I'm missing anything too important after that. It's really good to have in your lineup. It's just very consistent. And if like what I look for in a deck for Conquest is like if I get to my last deck and I have to win a game with it, am I confident in it? And with Handlock, absolutely. Like it's a really hard deck to tech against, whereas like the only thing it can really do is put in double BGH, which is good against it, but it's not enough to like consistently like say I'm gonna dominate it every time. So it's pretty much what you'd want in a conquest deck if you're going for more of the control route. So as far as control goes, it's probably the best available to you right now, and I think this is the best list. So if you have any comments or questions, or you have any other ideas of what you think should be in the list, then just leave those below. Follow us on Twitter at HS_perfectcurve, and until next time, remember, perfect is not impossible.
Next video.
How's that?